Welcome. I'm here today to talk about what it's like to be new. I'm here to tell my story about how I came to code from a non-CS background and how Clojure in particular helped me bridge that gap between self-study and an actual job in the tech industry. So I'm going to start with a little help from Randall Munroe. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this slide, but this was the very first time that I had heard about Lisp. And I had fallen for Randall's comics long before I started to code. There was a way in which he blended math and logic and romance and the existential questions that puzzle us all in this way that just fascinated me. So I found myself Googling the parts of his comics that I didn't understand, which was my introduction to a skill that we have all come to know and love, which was Google the answer. But anyway, he had me asking questions like, what is a Lisp? Who is Cory Doctorow? What is the Balmer Peak, and how can I spend more time in it? I'm still working on that one. I mean, for science. So as a little girl, I dreamed of becoming an astronaut, a detective, a mechanic, or a ninja. I think I had archaeologist on there as well, but I couldn't find a whip icon in time. That's also come in handy when you're snaking through old code. But I had never actually seen the creative or expressive potential of code. My dad is, he was a COBOL programmer, he still is. And so I would spend hours into the night coding QBasic programs with him while he did COBOL. But to me, I saw a lot of go-to lines, right? This was code for me, and I didn't quite see the art in it. And no offense to COBOL, I actually was looking for COBOL mode in Emacs, and I didn't have it, and I had to go with Fortran mode, so that's another issue if somebody wants to help me with that later. So instead of going into computer science, I instead studied literature, languages. My degree actually had an emphasis in German expressionist film. So after college and armed with a very esoteric sounding bachelor's degree, I was, afraid of the state of the world. This was like 2005, 6-ish. I was afraid of the lack of interesting, meaningful work opportunities. And so I took my bachelor's degree and I ran away from cell phone reception, and I chose to live in the middle of the woods with 50 other hippies. It's called an intentional community. It was an eco-village where all of our heat was generated from the geothermal springs, and all of our electricity was generated by the river. They used to call those communes, but now we call them intentional communities. So here we had solved a really big problem, right? Like, how do we create a world for ourselves in the woods? And we had solved that, but truth be told, we spent most of our time in meetings arguing about who had cleaned the bathroom last, or untangling these miscommunications that were the natural result of coming together and living in the woods and interacting as humans to build things and to solve problems. So after 4 years of this, it's very easy to stay in the woods for 4 years, believe me. Anyway, my little brother, who is a successful self-taught coder, he came to me and he said, you really like arts and languages, and I think you could be good at code. And so, here's the pop-up wireless Marriott thing I was telling you about. Okay, you don't see it though. Anyway, so I have spent more than 20 years of my life as a classical musician. I've traveled with orchestras and chamber groups and things like that. So when my brother came to me and said, I think you can code, I had already been introduced to concepts like abstraction and data structure manipulation. I just didn't know it yet. So here's one of my absolute favorite pieces in the whole wide world. It's the Bach Partita for solo violin. And he takes 3 notes, right? He takes a D and an F and an A, and then he strings it out into this gorgeous 20-minute piece that I will spend the rest of my life playing. And he never loses track of those 3 notes. He takes it and he takes those 3 notes and he maps over them. We've got these polyphonic expressions and we've got these chords that go over 4 strings. And I'm using my fingers right now, but it's the same feeling I had when I first came to Emacs. Those chords, those key bindings. It's like in your muscle. It's in your soul. So this was my introduction to functional programming. And lo and behold, last year's keynote speaker was the wonderful Melanie Mitchell. Who here saw that? Anyone? Okay, sweet. Yeah, she beautifully intersected her work in artificial intelligence and language. And she actually studied under Douglas F. Hofstadter, who wrote Gödel, Escher, and Bach. Who here has played around with this book or seen it or read parts of it, right? It's so good. But I haven't made it through the end. I'm just at the point where I can get through the introduction. But the thing about this book is that it was an invitation to digging into systems and to exploring things, right? And I think that sometimes we have this hard and fast line of what it means to be technical or what it means to not be technical. And this book blurs that line. And that line was blurred for me. And it was actually one of those things that piqued my curiosity. So I started to code with my brother's help. I did like Zed Shaw's Learn Python and Ruby the Hard Way, and tore through all these tutorials and like Code Academy online was really great. MIT courseware. There are all these wonderful resources. And so I bartended at night and I coded during the day, and I finally got to the point where I found an internship with this tiny, like 12-person startup in Portland. It's called Littlebird. And what Littlebird did was it took Twitter data and graphed those communities. So we would use graph theory calculations to take data and take communities and then tell stories with them. But my first year at Littlebird was really, really, really hard. And as an intern, I was put onto these projects where I was debugging this Ruby code with these method missings. And I think one programmer had kind of jokingly written some of the code to obscure it away from the other programmer as like a joke. And here I am as an intern just going like, I needed adults, please. So then I met this guy. And this is Ryan Spangler. He's a contributor to a lot of Clojure projects, but he's also a musician. And so we immediately connected on that level because what he did is he was able to listen to me. And so I think one of the biggest problems as early coders is that we don't have the vocabulary to articulate our problems, right? We're basically going to somebody and saying, why do these strawberries wear pajamas? Like we're basically saying the technical equivalent of nonsense. And so then, a well-meaning senior developer will just look at that person and say, I don't know how to help you. And so what Ryan did is he slowed down and he was able to listen to me and he was able to help me ask for the context that I needed and form better and better questions. And so this was a huge breakthrough to me as a developer because it's so easy to want to go into especially these first jobs and you want to prove yourself and you want to do your best and you tense and you speed up and it takes a lot to soften, and what it does is it takes a good team and good mentors to really cultivate that skill and say, hey, you're new at this and you want to do a really good job, but you have to slow down and you have to ask the right questions and you have to give yourself time to practice this art. And so with Ryan, he did something very clever. Our caching layer was already built in Clojure at the time, and he came on board. And it's a very small company, right? But he was able to convince the startup to rewrite our entire application in Clojure and Clojure scripts. It was fantastic. It was a dream experience. And so what he would do is he would hold these workshops for the entire development team, and we would come up with a puzzle, like let's graph all of the hex colors, and create Clojure data structures of these sorts of artistic and fanciful things. So we all learned this together, and it was really, really inspiring. You can see here, one of the things that I really appreciated about Ryan is that he uses descriptive and colorful language in his functions. He's very, very smart, but he tries to use map and reduce as much as possible, right? He is really skilled at taking complex things and breaking them down into the simplest parts. And this is a lesson that was really profound to me because when you build a code base, you're not always going to be there with your code, right? You're creating this living organism that lives on after you. And so you have a responsibility as a developer to write something that's going to be easily understood by those coming after you, regardless of experience level. And so this is actually a lovely circle packing algorithm that he wrote. And he, when he wrote this code, he pulled us into the workshop, and his dad was a math teacher, and so he's drawing things out, he's bringing us in, he's really excited to share this adventure that he went on to write this algorithm and optimize this very difficult problem. So after Ryan, we got to have Mr. Justin Smith come on board. I did not botch this slide, by the way. This is how he chooses to present his avatar on Twitter, so I wanted to respect his choices. Who here has been helped out by Justin Smith on IRC? Okay, I see a couple of people. I think the fact of the matter is that everybody has been, because that guy has been all over those channels. I've gone and looked at, I've searched for problems and had his name show up. He's sitting right behind me, and the top 10 results are him. Makes it really easy for me to figure out what's going on. But what Justin did in particular is he really helped me understand the Clojure documentation. I came to him at first and I said, as a newcomer, I'm really jazzed about Clojure. I like the elegance, the simplicity of the syntax, the rainbow parens. Oh my God, I love those. But the documentation is tricky for me. I feel like there's a barrier there. I feel like I have a hard time understanding what I'm doing. And so Justin said something, and I don't remember the exact words. We were getting Mexican food one day. And he said something to the lines of, once you understand some of the building blocks of the documentation, then you'll see that they're actually simpler. They're written in a style that builds on itself. So, it kind of hammered that point home that read the fucking manual is useless if you don't understand the context. And so what Justin did for me is he helped me understand the manual and understand how to get the answers that I needed. And that is something really special about Clojure. I had so much fun making these slides. By the way, that's the wand, because on those good days, I feel like I'm a wizard, On the bad days, not the case. But so anyway, he taught me the skill of staying within the REPL, really trying to go to the source code or the documentation that I needed within my workflow. So he started to develop these wonderful practices, and he really taught me how to break down things that I didn't understand into smaller pathways toward understanding. And he's here today, and he's so great. I just love what he does for this community and for me personally. So this is the REPL. I just recently started a new job where we are a Java and a JavaScript shop. And the first day I came in and I said, where's my REPL? Where is my REPL? And apparently Java does not have one. But it's powerful. It's become this metaphor for me of how do we build something complicated from the ground up? I know when we were rebuilding our application at Littlebird, we hooked straight into the database, right? We used Monger at the time, which is a wrapper around MongoDB. But in other words, we also used Postgres, which is, I preferred that. But so we would go straight to the REPL and we would build up these data models, these collections, like one line at a time. And so we were able to experiment with the architecture of our application. It was really powerful for a newcomer to be able to build a server-side handler from the ground up. Like I'd go to the REPL and we'd figure out what the data structure looked like, and then from there we would figure out the logic around that, and it was powerful. And it was thanks to this routing system that Justin had made. We had this application over WebSockets, and it was great. I'm not sure if I will ever understand it, but Justin, maybe you can help me. Anyway, so the REPL. So And also Bruce Howman built this great tool called Figwheel. I don't know, has anyone used Figwheel? Figwheel fans? Yes, it's so great. It is so great. Like to be able to compile your JavaScript on the fly like that, and to have your web browser open, your Emacs, you've got your IDE, you've got your Cider queued up or whatever, and your terminal. And you build a whole world out of that elegant simplicity. And now that I'm at a larger company, I'm really, really appreciating the tools that Clojure has developed for this sort of interactive design and simplicity. So like I said, I left Little Bird, and now I'm working at a slightly bigger company. And so I was crying about not having a REPL, but the fact of the matter is I'm so grateful to be able to learn about the languages that Clojure is built on. There's no way that I can go in there and just wave my hands and say, Clojure's so much better and Clojure script is so much better, if I don't understand why. And so what Clojure has really given me is this kind of sense of, I can dig deeper into the source code. I can dig deeper into these problems. And now that I'm working with different languages, I feel like it's really helped me overcome that fear. And it's sort of this alchemy of taking fear and turning it into curiosity. And it's something that this community is really, really good at. And I was able to go to Clojure West last year on an opportunity grant. I remember there were 6% women there, which everyone was really proud about. I was like, wait, 6%? Everyone's clapping? Wait, what's going on? And my key performance indicator for that situation is how long the line is for the women's bathroom, and I still have yet to wait in line. And so that day that I have to wait in line to use the women's bathroom at a tech conference, I'll be really happy. But anyway, I just want to take this opportunity to thank Catherine Fellows and Anna. They just spoke just a little while ago about Clojure Bridge. There are people out here in this community who want to help newcomers, and it's so much easier when you've had experience to be able to slow down and be patient, not only with yourself and others, but when you're a newcomer, and especially when you're a newcomer from an underrepresented group, you really want to prove yourself. I went into JAMA, and I'm all about the teamwork, I'm all about the communication, but man, I had my shoulders bunched up to my ears when I started that job because I didn't want to let them down. I wanted to prove to them that I was technical, and that attitude actually kind of got in my way. It was harder for me to connect with my teammates, and I really had to soften and trust in that practice of being in the beginner's mind and having respect for that, because the very best developers are the ones who never let go of that sense of curiosity and that sense of humility and that sense of that beginner's mind. And so it takes a lot of reflection and a lot of patient listening to onboard newcomers. It's a lot. It's a lot of energy. It's a big deal. But if we do that, we can really come together to open our arms up to a more interesting, more diverse, broader community of people from all sorts of backgrounds. And as developers, we love to solve problems, right? There's joy in that. And so the more colorful that community becomes, the more joy we're all going to get out of this process, because the hard problems are not going to go away. Oops. I still have the problem of the PowerPoint presentation. But anyway, so there's no developer fairy who's going to arrive in the night to sever your junior prefix from your engineering title. And the longer I code and the longer I'm in this adventure, the more I realize that is a pretty okay thing, especially when I am doing that journey with people like you. And so I just really thank you guys for the opportunity to code and solve problems and be here again at this conference. And I'm looking forward to more. So. Any questions, any experiences that you want to share about either being a newcomer or onboarding newcomers? Yes.
I'm wondering what it's been like after working with Clojure for quite some time to then go to a team which is using Java and JavaScript. Have you been able to bring some of your Clojure ways of thinking, and how has the team embraced some of the changes that you've proposed?
Yes, that's a really good question. He said, coming from a team that used Clojure and now working on a team that uses Java and JavaScript, what what have I brought from my Clojure background? And the answer is that it can be frustrating at times, when you're not working in your mother code tongue as a newcomer. But my teammates have a huge respect for my functional background. One of the reasons why I went to JAMA is because they're wanting to break off more and more of their microservices, or more of their application into microservices. And the team I'm working on right now uses React, which embraces a lot of those functional perspectives. And so right now I'm trying to navigate the whole Flux implementation thing, while in the back of my mind I'm going like, why don't we just pass it a map of data? I don't understand. So I'm trying to navigate how things get passed down through props, which is great, because then I'm able to ask questions and show teammates how I would solve a problem from my sort of functional perspective. And there's libraries like Lodash, for example, that help people do that with JavaScript. And so it's actually been a really mutually beneficial situation, because we use reagent, which can achieve a lot in sort of this terse syntax. And so there was a lot going on in the background in terms of what we had to do in order to make that happen in the browser, that I'm kind of just now getting to and just now understanding working with vanilla JavaScript. So I think both of us are really early benefiting, and now I can kind of laugh at myself when I get frustrated. I'm like, oh, well, we just did it this way, and I don't understand why you got to do this. Anyway. So yeah, I think humor is very important. But how else am I going to convince my company to rewrite everything in Clojure and ClojureScript? That's my secret, by the way. Now they know. Catherine.
What about the reverse? Like, now that you have started programming in Java and JavaScript, what things will you bring back when you start doing Clojure and ClojureScript again?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So she asked maybe the reverse of David's question, which was that, what am I going to bring back to Clojure now that I've been studying Java and JavaScript? And I think I don't know, but I'm excited to do that. And I think one of the nice things is that now that I'm not coding Clojure during the day, I miss it. And so I feel like I want to be more involved with, for example, Clojure Bridge or the Clojure meetups that we have in Portland. So it's actually kind of renewed my interest in it. Now that I'm not doing it during my day job, it can kind of go back to being a passion on the side. So I'm hoping to be more involved in that way. Yeah?
What would you say were some of your explicit pain points coming from Ruby into Clojure, getting that first exposure to a functional paradigm?
There weren't any. No, I'm just kidding. That actually might be my answer. I think it wasn't difficult to get that initial sort of, this is Polish notation, and 1 + 1 is now actually +1, And I think that for my brain, that was really comforting, to have that sort of function and then argument, and being able to nest ideas and being able to pass functions in that way. So. Okay, here's one. CIDR configuration. That was a pain point. But once I got it up, once I got the whole nREPL situation figured out, then it was smoother sales. Sweet. Right here.
Do you have any tips on asking better questions?
Yes, thank you. That's a really good question. His question was, do you have any tips on asking better questions? Yes. So I think it boils down to vocabulary, right? And when we were talking about the Clojure documentation, my biggest barrier with that was not understanding the definitions, right? So I think we can take that and move it outward. So if somebody comes to you and says the equivalent of why are my strawberries wearing pajamas? That doesn't make any sense to you. And so I think one of the best things you can do as somebody who's being asked that question is to back up and ask questions about the context around it. I remember there was a really frustrating experience where I was asking a question about a variable assignment, and I kept asking the same question over and over again because I got frustrated, and I was already at the point of frustration such that I couldn't find another way to describe that. And so the person helping me couldn't really help me, but my team had really helped me step back and tell, where had I come from? How did I get to that part of the problem? I think what I'm trying to say is asking questions that aren't initially understood requires some sort of backing up and filling in more context. Yep.
So it sounds like you may have had a conceptual bridge besides Algebra 1. So for
Yes.
you, maybe it was, Bob.
Yeah.
Provide some kind of anchor by which you can make analogies to this new domain. And I'm wondering if you have any kind of general advice for other new programmers, what they can use as a bridge, how to bootstrap on those other understandings that are outside that traditional CS background, and so on.
That's a really good question, and I think that the answer to that is that we need more of those things. Like, we need more programs that reach out to people who are interested in music and somehow create curriculums around, exploring functional programming through music or through language. I know I have played around with functions using English expressions. Like I was trying to figure out the difference between recursion and recursive looping, and I was talking about a stack of questions and needing to pop one off the top and then ask again, and so you can actually create code, and instead of using examples like the Fibonacci sequence, you can use more descriptive, more language-based analogy for some of these concepts. And so I would like to throw that out there and say, we're already seeing that there's a need for curriculums to get people into coding, and I think multidisciplinary ones are going to be really effective at targeting people who would really love to grow up and make their living doing this stuff. Over here.
What do you think supports junior developers in terms of giving them feedback? Like, one thing I have not problems with, but in code reviews, I'm always correcting them, and I don't want to sound like condescending or mean, but sometimes it kind of comes off that way. So what do you think would be like a supportive style for giving feedback?
That's a really great question. And his question was basically, how can I give feedback in a way that doesn't come off as being critical? I have a couple things to say about that. One is that I've worked with teammates who don't give me any critical feedback at all, and that actually ups my anxiety level, because then I'm thinking, like, what am I doing wrong? I go home at night and I'm racking over all these things that I could have messed up. But I think that establishing respect for your junior developers is key. And one of the best things that you can do is when you mess up, or when you make a mistake, or when you find something that you want to improve upon, bring that junior developer over and say, hey, I messed up. I messed up big time, and have some humility about that. And that's going to really inspire respect and allow them to open up and be in this vulnerable space that's going to allow them to go to the really hard places. So that's a really good question. Yep.
Have you ever run into a situation in which some documentations make wrong assumptions? Like you have the previous exposure to some JVM-specific mechanisms or some other stuff that kind of blocked your way to learn or to achieve what you were.
So your question is, was there anything JVM-specific that was a blocker?
Maybe wrong assumptions in the documentation that you've seen around. Something that makes assumptions like you have previous exposure to whatever JVM thing or another language.
Yeah, I'm still trying to understand, I'm still very, very new in my understanding of how the JVM works. I know that when we were working on an application where we had our front and our back end required separate JVMs, and then we actually started using Kafka. And so a third JVM was implemented. And so I have more of like a working relationship with the JVM in the sense that, wow, you got to take into account how long it takes to restart all of those, and if something breaks on one, you got to restart the others. And so I think that's my experience with the JVM, and it's one of those things that I want to learn more about, because it is a really powerful aspect of the language that I've only kind of encountered in my own use of it. In the back.
Now that you work on code, would you trade your humanities education for a code education?
Oh, that's a really good question. I wouldn't change my humanities education. I might not necessarily get a bachelor's from an accredited institution if I could do it all over again, but I would never, ever trade my study of arts and music and film, ever, and language. I mean, I will be studying that for the rest of my life. Yep.
So when you started at Clojure, and you mentioned dealing with the code base that wasn't always easy to understand, and not really knowing the right questions to ask.
Yeah.
What did you do to keep from feeling overwhelmed or burnt out, if it just wasn't right for you?
Well, the truth was that I did feel overwhelmed, and it was an application stack that wasn't working for me. And I'm not actually sure where I would be now if I didn't have Ryan and Justin to come on board to be my mentors. So yeah, I mean, that's a good question, but I think that's where we lose a lot of people is they come into these internships or these entry-level jobs, and they're in an environment where it's a stressful, agile thing, and we got to ship that code, and we got to do that feature, and I think that's the majority, honestly. So I think all I have to say to that is I have so much appreciation for this community and for this language because it really kind of connected with me at a place where I was really frustrated. Yep.
I started pairing with a developer for a project, and I found that when you're typing up code, that talking through everything that you're doing really, really helps them understand what that even if it slows you down greatly.
Yes.
Going through and saying, I'm doing this because you're giving detailed reasons.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And A, thank you for mentoring a junior developer, and B, that's a really great skill that is also valuable for the company, right? I've had developers, especially at my new company, where they'll be walking through an explanation of something, and is anyone familiar with the term rubber duck debugging? Yeah, it's great. And so in the course of explaining something to somebody else, there's that self-reflection that's happening. And so I've been the junior developer with whom a senior developer has said, hey, wait, this is actually really, really confusing. Like, I think we're actually doing something wrong. That happens a lot. And so when companies are looking to bring on junior developers or interns, please consider this as a benefit to that. Like, you are actually creating an environment where your senior devs are going to be forced to be more mindful about the implementation and the implementation of features and also the building up of technical debt. I mean, you've got somebody who's new saying, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? In the back?
I guess, so at what point are you going to stop calling yourself a junior developer?
Me personally?
Yeah, or I guess what is a junior developer?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, when I got my new job, it just said software developer, and I bought myself some bourbon and some really good headphones. But I think, like I was saying earlier, I don't know. That's a really good question, and it's a really hard one, and I just don't know. All right. One more question?
Yeah, just one. Do you think that having that background in music kind of prepared you a certain mindset that was useful to work in, say, considering transformations and the kind of things that you do in Clojure?
Yeah, that's a great question. So he said, does he think that my background in music helped me understand these things? Yes, but also my background in bartending, okay? I don't know if you've ever been to a bar. It's magic. It's phenomenal. I mean, the stuff that you have to keep track of and then also be nice to the person while you're keeping track of all of these things, go to the bartenders. I'm serious. And, there are a lot of people in that industry, in the service industry, who are wanting to do interesting, creative things and solve the hard problems, and they're working their asses off, and some of them are not able to support themselves. And so if you're a company that can give someone like that a working, or a living wage apprenticeship and teach them these skills, I mean, imagine what we could do if we tapped into that talent pool. All right. Thank you very much.